my pleasure on behalf of the university, the center, and my colleague and co-sponsor of this evening's event, Dr. Rebecca Davis-Mathias, who is the director of the Brennan School of Business's Center for Global Peace Through Commerce, to welcome you to tonight's program, Is Dreaming Illegal? Seeking Sustainable Solutions. The pressing issue of immigration, which is so prevalent in the headlines today, in the heated political rhetoric of our time, and which is such a complex factor in the machinations of the global economy, is a deeply personal issue for all of us at Dominican University. Here, we pride ourselves on being a relationship-centered place, where the participation in the creation of a more just and humane world is a driving priority. And in this community, fully 25% of our freshman class, for example, tell us that their native language is not English. Of the 17 sophomores that I have in class this semester, only 2 are not either themselves immigrants or the children of immigrants. Last fall, many of you from among the community will remember that many of our students were actively and courageously involved in the movement to pass the DREAM Act. Some of our undocumented students even testifying publicly about their experience as college students and their hopes for the future. And so it is important that we continually keep the complexities and the simplicities, the legalities and the ethics, the statistics and the stories before us, examining them with intellectual rigor and in the light of the demands of our mission and of our religious heritage. So I'm delighted to introduce you to the distinguished panel who will lead us through such a reflection tonight. Each panelist is invited to give about 20 minutes of remarks in turn, and I will introduce all of them now so that when they begin to speak, they will just follow after one another without interruption. And after they've completed their remarks, then we'll have some time for comment from the floor. And we hope that we're able to engage not only in a question and answer session, but in really a rich conversation, which will involve all of us. So to begin, Dr. Mark Hugo Lopez is the Associate Director of the Pew Hispanic Research Center, a nonpartisan research organization founded in 2001 by the Pew Research Center that seeks to improve understanding of the U.S. Hispanic population and to chronicle Latinos' growing impact on the nation. The center does not take on policy issues, but engages in foundational research. An economist by training, Dr. Lopez's area of expertise include labor economics, civic engagement, voting behavior, and the economics of education. To give you a flavor of the depth and breadth of his research, the reports he has authored or co-authored recently include Hispanics and the Economic Downturn, Housing Woes, and Remittance Cuts, published in January 2009. Latinos and Education, Explaining the Attainment Gap, published in October 2009. Latinos and the 2010 Elections, Strong Support for Democrats, Weak Voter Motivation, in October 2010. And the 2010 Congressional Reapportionment and Latinos Report, published just a few weeks ago in January of this year. In addition to his work at Pew, Dr. Lopez currently serves as a visiting professor at the University of Maryland School of Public Policy, where in 2007 he was recognized with the Excellence in Teaching Award. It's an honor to have you with us, Dr. Lopez, and we appreciate the distance you've traveled to be with us. Following Dr. Lopez will be the Reverend Craig Mooson. Reverend Mooson serves as the University Ombudsperson at DePaul University and concurrently teaches in the College of Law, the College of Arts and Sciences, and the School of New Learning. Admitted to the bar in 1984, Reverend Mooson has a long history of legal practice, legal education, and advocacy in the area of immigration. He co-founded DePaul College of Law's Asylum and Immigration Legal Clinic. He founded and directed the Midwest Immigration Rights Center, which is now called the National Immigrant Justice Center. and he directed legal services for Travelers and Immigrants Aid. Highly regarded by colleagues, students, and clients, Dr. Reverend Musin is the recipient of the Chicago Bar Association's Maurice Weigel Award for Outstanding Service to the Legal Profession, DePaul University's Barbara A. Sizemore Diversity Award and its Spirit of DePaul Award, and the Community Service Award from the Greater Chicago chapter of the American Immigration Lawyers Association. Following Reverend Musin will be Dr. Elizabeth Collier, our own Assistant Professor of Business Ethics at Dominican University. Let's hear it for the hometown girl. With a PhD in Theological Ethics from Loyola University Chicago, Dr. Collier's areas of specialization are ethical methodology and business, ethics as it relates to U.S. immigration and policy, and virtue ethics. Currently, she is working on a book with a colleague at DePaul University on the application of Catholic social theory to business and the economy. She is also the associate editor of the Journal of Religion and Business Ethics. In her teaching, writing, and public speaking on the topic we address tonight, Dr. Collier brings her academic training together with her practical paralegal experience on immigration cases. One last thing. Of Liz's work as an educator, one of her students remarked, "After you've taken her class, you will have learned a lot, and you will start thinking in a different way about the world." I'm sure that will be true of all of us this evening as well. And finally, Elena Segura, the founding director of the Office of Immigrant Affairs and Immigration Education at the Archdiocese of Chicago. Ms. Segura has been with the Archdiocese since 1999, when she began as the diocesan director of the Catholic Campaign for Human Development. In the past 10 years, she has built the largest diocesan ministry dedicated to the service of immigrants in the entire country, including the creation of Immigrant to Immigrant Ministry, which is the office's newest program, empowering immigrants through a foundation of biblical reflection from the immigrant experience, to engage in actions of service and justice as they are formed as leaders in their parish communities. To date, this ministry has trained 350 pastoral ministers who are working through 55 Hispanic and 5 Polish parishes in the Archdiocese. She has worked on the formation of a network entitled Priests for Justice for Immigrants, which now has a membership of over 200 priests, and the formation of Sisters and Brothers for Immigrants, represented by 57 religious orders. Recently, Ms. Segura's work was recognized by Arise Chicago, the Chicago chapter of Interfaith Worker Justice, with their 2010 Prophetic Leader Award. So you can see we have a very distinguished, learned, and practiced panel. So without further ado, Dr. Lopez.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. My name is Mark Lopez, and that introduction was the best introduction I've heard of myself. I'm like, wow, I gotta take some of those notes from you. But I'm at the Pew Hispanic Center in Washington, D.C., and I want to first tell you a little bit about the center. Might help if I turn it on, huh? There we go. The center has been around for about 10 years, but there's an important fact about the center that I want to point to. We call ourselves a fact tank and not a think tank. What I mean by that is that we take no positions on policy. And so every time I give a talk, I mention that because I want you to see that I'm just going to show you some facts and just show you some numbers, but I'm not going to talk about policy except maybe in the form of public opinion. And that's because at the center, we don't take any positions at all. We're a nonpartisan organization. So that distinguishes us from something called a think tank, where if you look at the reports from a think tank, you'll notice they have policy recommendations at the end. Our reports don't have any policy recommendations. We just simply present you with some facts. So I want to tell you a little bit of a story today, a story about immigration to the United States. As you know, today we're in the midst of another great immigration wave. Yet this particular immigration wave, while it has more people in it than the previous immigration wave, it is not of the same share of the U.S. population that the previous immigration was in the early 20th century. Right now, about 12.2% of the nation's population is foreign-born, but in the early part of the 20th century, we reached almost 15% of the U.S. population as foreign-born. Now, when we talk about folks who are in the U.S. and who are immigrants, there's about 40 million. And about 29 million of those folks are legal immigrants. They're either naturalized citizens, or they have some sort of legal residency, or they're legal temporary migrants. But there's an estimated 11.2 million who are what we call unauthorized immigrants. And they represent about 28% of all of the nation's foreign-born population. Now, when we talk about the population of unauthorized immigrants, this particular population has been growing and growing rapidly. At the beginning of the last decade, in 2000, there were about 8.4 million unauthorized immigrants in the country. Today, we estimate about 11.2, and that's actually below the peak that we saw in 2007 of 12 million in 2007. So it looks like the trend has been one of increase and somewhat of a decline in recent years, though we've seen a stabilization in the population more recently. Now, one of the interesting stories about the unauthorized immigrant population is its flows. How many are coming to the United States? And this is a question we get all the time at the center. And what's interesting is that we've noticed this decline in the population of unauthorized immigrants. We also notice a slowdown in the flow of people entering the country who themselves are unauthorized. But that decline in the flow into the U.S. started before the recession really took off. And you'll see that here by, if you look between 2000 and 2005, about 850,000 unauthorized immigrants entered the country annually. Between 2005 and 2007, more like 550,000. And more recently, of course, with the impact of the recession, about 300,000 a year, at least according to our estimates. Now, why have we seen some of these declines in terms of the net inflow, and why the decline in the population? Well, there's a number of reasons, and I've already hinted at one being the economic downturn. In fact, in this last recession, when the recession started, the folks who were actually impacted first by the recession were immigrants. They were the ones who lost their jobs first. Their unemployment rate shot up right away, and that's partly because many of them were in the construction industry. And with the housing downturn, many folks in the housing construction industry lost their jobs. This particularly impacted immigrants. But more recently, we've seen some immigrant labor gains. And in fact, 1 year after the recession, through last fall, it was immigrants who actually had job growth, whereas among native-born Americans, there was no job growth. There actually continued to be job loss through the fall of last year. More recent data suggests that actually the story has become one of more where both groups are actually now gaining jobs. So the economic recovery is now spreading around the country and impacting all parts of the country. Another reason why we may have seen some of the declines in both the flow into the U.S. and the population of unauthorized immigrants is because of increased border enforcement. It's become harder to cross the border. It's become more difficult. There are more Border Patrol agents, and also there are many more communities who are engaged in programs like the 287G program. So it's not only border enforcement, but just more enforcement generally. It also may be that there are more opportunities in people's home countries, and compared to the U.S. and the economic situation here, it may not be the right time to come to the U.S., or maybe the decision to stay home is one because that's where better opportunities reside. Now, one of the interesting things about Mexico, because we have really great data about Mexico, is that when we talk about the population of immigrants coming to this country, from Mexico, we have really not seen a change in the number of Mexicans returning from the United States. Where we have seen a change is in the number of Mexicans coming. And that number has dropped from about 1 million a year in about 2006 to more like 500,000, maybe 400,000 more recently. So a big drop in the number of Mexicans who are coming to the country. As a little side note, because I like facts, did you know that about 11% of all people born in Mexico worldwide are in the United States? So 11% of Mexico's population is in the United States today. Speaking of Mexico, when we talk about unauthorized immigrants, about 60% alone are from Mexico. But the reason why I want to show you this slide is because I want you to see that it's not just a Mexican phenomena, and is not just a Latin American phenomena. The unauthorized immigrant population comes from all parts of the world. There are Russian unauthorized immigrants, there are Irish unauthorized immigrants, there are Thai unauthorized immigrants, there are Filipino unauthorized immigrants. It is not just a story of Latin America. Now, where do unauthorized immigrants live? Well, California and Texas dominate. About a quarter of all unauthorized immigrants are in California. You got about another 1.6, 1.7 million in Texas. In Illinois, we have about 500,000 unauthorized immigrants in the state of Illinois. Now, Illinois is actually the nation's 6th largest unauthorized immigrant population. And you'll notice some interesting things in this list of states. Of course, you're probably not surprised about California and Texas being at the top of the list. But look at Georgia right behind Illinois. Georgia is actually one of the places that is a new destination for immigrants in addition to unauthorized immigrants. And look at Maryland, look at Virginia. They're on this list as well. They are also places which you may not think of as having some of the nation's largest unauthorized immigrant populations, yet they're in the top 10. Now, in terms of the share of the population that is unauthorized, about 3.7% of the entire U.S. population are unauthorized immigrants. But in some states like Nevada, 7%, for example, in Nevada, 7.2% of Nevada's population is itself unauthorized immigrants. In California, it's about 6.8%. For Illinois, we're at about 4.1%. This is just a map to show you, give you some sense of where the population is at. But you'll see that it's somewhat dispersed around the country. There are some parts where there are relatively few unauthorized immigrants, but there are unauthorized immigrants by our estimate in every state in the country. Now, I want to talk to you about the children of unauthorized immigrants. And there are two ways to look at this. First, there are unauthorized immigrant children. These are children who have come to the United States from another country but are not here legally. These are themselves unauthorized immigrants. There's about 1 million of them. Their median age is about 13 years of age. And if you take a look at how many are of school-going age, there's about 984,000 who would be enrolled in school if they were in school. And they are between the ages of their ages are between the ages of what you would expect for somebody who's K to 12. That's about 3.5% of all of the nation's public school students. Now, in Illinois, we estimate that over the last 5 years, there's been about 46,000 unauthorized immigrant children in the state of Illinois alone. And if we talk about unauthorized immigrant children and the trend would be indicated by the bottom part of this particular chart, the red part, you'll see that actually there's been a decline in the number of unauthorized immigrant children in the U.S. by our estimate, from about 1.5 million in 2000 to about 1 million today. The other interesting part of this story, however, it's not just unauthorized immigrant children, but it's also the U.S.-born children of unauthorized immigrants. And we estimate that there are about 4.5 million children in the U.S. who were born in the U.S. and therefore are U.S. citizens, but have at least one parent who is an unauthorized immigrant. Now, I was recently at a conference of administrators in the Northeast who were talking about and sharing notes on how to help unauthorized immigrant children and the U.S.-born children of unauthorized immigrants. One of the things they pointed to is that a lot of discussion goes on around the unauthorized immigrant children, but in order to get financial aid, a lot of U.S.-born children of unauthorized immigrants face challenges as well. Their parents may not have a Social Security number. They may not be able to fill out a financial aid form. And it was interesting as we were talking about that because it's a part of the story that doesn't quite get as much discussion as the story of the students who are unauthorized immigrants themselves. Now, when we talk about the ages of these young people, one of the things you'll see is that when we talk about those who are the children of unauthorized immigrants but are U.S. born, you'll see how young they are. 46% of them are between the ages of 0 to 5. But when we talk about those who are themselves unauthorized immigrants but are children, you'll notice that over half are between the ages of 12 and 17, a very different group altogether in terms of their demographic characteristics. I also want to point out that for many unauthorized immigrants and many families, there's actually quite a number of families that have a mixed composition with regards to their status and with regards to how many children there are. There are about 16.6 million people in unauthorized immigrant families nationwide. And when we talk about the characteristics of unauthorized immigrant parents and unauthorized immigrant adults, you notice that one of the characteristics you usually think of when we talk about unauthorized immigrants is that they're mostly male and they don't have children. Yet, when we take a look at the statistics, what we find is this. Among the men, there are actually more who are either married, have a partner, or are living with somebody as a partner, or they themselves have children, more so than those who are single and living without a partner and living without children. Among the women, we see a much starker difference. Most unauthorized immigrant women are themselves partnered to somebody or have children. Now, I want to give you some sense of public opinion because we've talked about some facts. One of the other things we do at the center is we do a lot of public opinion polling. We asked Hispanics about the top issues that they saw were of most importance to them personally in the last election. And here's what we found. We found that education was actually the top issue for Hispanics, followed by jobs and healthcare. And by the way, this is just among registered voters, but the numbers are the same whether we talk about registered voters or all Latinos, even among foreign-born Hispanics, a very similar pattern. You'll notice that immigration, however, is fifth on this list, behind the federal budget deficit at 31%. 31% saying it was extremely important to them. Now, that doesn't mean that immigration is not important. It's an important issue for many Hispanics, but not every Hispanic is an immigrant, and a lot of Hispanics, when we ask them, don't necessarily put immigration as a top issue. They put education, healthcare, or jobs as top issues. Nonetheless, a significant share of Hispanics, about a third of Hispanic registered voters, say that the issue of immigration is extremely important to them. So for many Hispanics, it's a very important issue. I want to close by sharing some data. This is the closest that we have come to asking specifically about the DREAM Act. We have not specifically asked about the DREAM Act on any of our public opinion polling, and there's some polling on the DREAM Act, but frankly, the questions are not very well crafted. But what we have done here is we have done a question asking about support for in-state tuition for unauthorized immigrant students. And you'll see that among Latinos, 78% say that if an unauthorized immigrant student graduates from a public high school in their state, they support the idea that that student should actually receive in-state tuition costs at the local public institutions if they've graduated from high school. And you can see that the numbers are pretty much the same across the board, with some of the strongest support among those who are naturalized immigrants themselves. Okay, thank you very much, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for the honor of being with you. What a delight, and be with these panelists and all of you. To dream for a better future has always been part of the core of the experience of this nation. I believe it was John Hyam, an American intellectual historian, who said that you could look at the history of immigration in the United States, and it could be distinguished by those people who had lost the dream and were trying to exclude those who still had the dream of making the world a better place. And so when we ask tonight about, is it illegal to dream, maybe it's important to talk about, can we dream again about that world that we want to create, that God has called us to create in this wonderful nation, and the potential we have, and how we look at immigration. So is it illegal to dream for our youth and our families? Or can we together build a new coalition to dream better? I should also give the caveat that although I am a lawyer, I'm not giving legal advice tonight. And if you ask specific questions, I probably can't answer your immigration question, but I can refer you to Professor Kerment. But I do want to give one big context before I get into the substance. I've been asked to talk a little bit about what the law is, why are there so many issues with where we're at. And some of you may know I used to practice law with Professor Kerment, and there was a big difference when I worked at that law firm with him. Corporate clients had relatively big budgets that they wanted to pursue their legal aims, and they'd hire him to come in and fight the good fight with integrity, but with aggressive, good, creative lawyering. And they would go as far as they had to go to win their case, and often the law permitted them with good attorneys to do that. When I left that to practice immigration law, I found a whole different kind of practice. Our clients often didn't speak English. They didn't know the legal system, perhaps. They might have signed papers that they didn't know. Maybe an elementary child in their family was the translator who was neither proficient in English or their native language. And yet those documents may be used against them because they signed it, even though they weren't sure what they signed. Some had no remedies. And as a lawyer, that's one of the hardest things, to meet with your client, spend some time, and then after all your creativity, even if you were Professor Kerment, not be able to find a solution, and to tell that person that you cannot help them. I also worked with hundreds of refugees, often suffering post-traumatic stress or the violence of persecution and torture. And because the system put them in the proceedings to deport them, they couldn't say, excuse me, can I have a timeout to get well, to get healthy, so I can testify of myself? And then we put them in a courtroom and put them up there on a witness stand and ask them questions, just like the torturer might have done in their prison cell in El Salvador or Guatemala. And I, as a lawyer, was part of that, and I wore my suit, and I'm asking questions. Was I as guilty? How does that do that as a lawyer? So to think about the American legal system, which some people have talked about as the old jousting of knights back and forth, fighting each other, and to put immigrants into that system, and asylees even more difficult. So think of that context when people say, oh, there is a law. It's a little bit different when we work with this system. So that's the big context. So my goal tonight in the short time is to give you what I would take a full semester of teaching immigration law to give you a broad overview and what I said, the not so good news, why it's not as helpful today, why what a tragedy it was to not pass the DREAM Act. Mark, I do take positions, so you'll hear some of that too. And I welcome your questions and critiques if you think that I'm misstating in the questions and answers afterwards. So people tell me, let's see if I got my first. There we go. Can you see that? I made a brick wall. As a lawyer, I need kind of pictures in my head. These are many of the remedies that are, quote, on the books for immigration law. I'll get through some of them, but for me, it's like I tell my clients, if we can build a brick wall, if I can find the right remedy, maybe you could stay here in that sense. But it really is, in many ways, a fantasy, because although these all have the name of remedies, immigration, asylum, the like, as I hope in the short time I have, you'll see a lot of these are not available to a lot of people. So basically, how does our immigration system work? Well, first of me, think for 1 second. Think you're one of the first colonists coming to the United States. Right? If you had to make immigration law, what would it be? Dream a little bit. What would be a fair system? A lottery? Before you come, put your name in a hat and they pick the first 100 out? Would that be fair? Do we need more nurses and doctors, so if you have a nursing degree, you get to come in? Do we need more ministers? Women religious? I'll vote for them. But think about it. The Commonwealth countries have a point system, kind of like some colleges. They decide what is important. So we like young, healthy workers. Right? Educated, you have a PhD, you get more points than you get if you have a high school diploma. Put all the numbers in, and if you get over 150 points, you get in. Might be fair. Think about it. Then we have to decide what is the fair way, right? What do we need in this nation? What do we need more of? So think about that, because sometimes we get stuck in what we have, right? And then we fight over the crumbs of that sort of thing. But as I tell you the overview, so what do we do? We've decided kind of 3 main areas for immigration law in this country. Family reunification, business, refugees. We've decided that family reunification is the most important. By the way, Mark gave a lot of numbers. I'll be a professor and ask a quiz here. How many people lawfully come into the country each year through our immigration system? Pardon? Okay. No, just total, how many? Yeah, how many? Mark gave you unauthorized flow coming in. So people talk like they know immigration law. We're this big, generous nation. Just throw out a number. 200,000. Anybody else? Don't be shy. 5 million. Okay, it's closer to 1 million. All right? About 1 million. 226,000 are family relationships. We've decided that immediate relatives, spouses and minor children, can come in almost without number. It works out every year a lot less. But we've decided as a country family reunification. So you hear the stories, you'll marry someone. I tell my immigration law students, marry for love, not for immigration purposes. Right? Because everybody thinks, what are we marrying? But think about that theologically. What does it mean to marry for love? And if I love that you're a citizen? Right? I mean, you can get yourself into, what does it mean? So, but that's one way. But we say that. We then have a visa system that's not automatic, but we have other relationships, adult children, siblings, right? And we're like a bakery, a deli or a bakery. You come in, you get a number. We decide so many thousand siblings will come in each year. So many thousand adult children will come in each year. And that's for the whole nation, the whole world. So to be fair, we now think, was it fair? Should Switzerland get as many immigrants as China or not? Now Liz is going to talk about theological ethics and fairness, so I'll let her talk about that. But ponder that for a second. How would you develop a fair system? So we try to balance that. We say that Switzerland can get 20,000 people a year and China can get 20,000 people a year. Is that fair? Maybe. So then it's a rush to the courthouse to who gets their bakery number first. All right? But we're doing that at the same time we're saying adult children get so many numbers and siblings get so many, right? So you can think of the different family relationships you want to get, but all of that comes in at about 600,000 people a year. So it'd take me several class periods to go through the specifics of how that works out, but I'm throwing the matrix at you, right? So you've got per country, you want to be fair, and per category. We may want more children than brothers of citizens because they'll contribute more to our country down the road, right? Siblings might be older and that sort of thing. Okay, does that make sense for most? I know I'm rushing because I have limited time. So that's how we kind of look at the family. You get a visa, you apply for it, you show that Tony's my brother, and so therefore we got all the birth certificates, and he'll get on, and he'll get his card, and it'll say, Tony, Creeman, where is that from? Where do your ancestors come from? Poland. Okay, Poland only used 5 of their immigrants visa numbers last year, so you're okay there, but your category's filled up, so you got to wait 2 more years. Well, it turns out when you start doing that, so that the numbers merge with that bakery, that deli number you received, some countries got to wait 19 years. So we have this family reunification program that says, let's get our families together, you get your eligibility, you're eligible, and you got to wait 19 years. That's mostly Mexico and Philippines and the like, but it ranges anywhere from 6 months to 19 years if you broke it down from all the countries. So we have a generous family visa program, but for a lot of people, it's a long wait. Same thing with businesses. We let in about 140,000 businesses. We decide certain jobs are more important than others. If you have a Nobel Prize, you can get in the country right away, right? If you're a distinguished scholar, it's easier to get in. We decide on certain job occupations. We don't want to bring in people that will compete with American workers. And that's just a hard thing to do. But regardless, in trying to remain competitive, those 140,000 visas get used up almost automatically. So you got about 600,000 family, 140,000 business. We take in about 100,000 refugees. Now, that sounds generous. We take in more refugees than any country in the world, although the Swedes take in more per capita. So again, what's fair? What's generous? The Swedes take a lower total number, but per capita, they take more refugees in. So I'm not quibbling over that, but again, how do you think about fairness and whatever in that sense? And then we have work that I used to do a lot of, asylum work, which is additional refugee work, where we have to get lawyers to represent people to prove that they have well-founded fear of persecution and the like. So putting all of those together, we get about 1 million lawful immigrants a year. 1,000,001, it varies and things like that, okay? So it's a lot, but we have, 350, 400 million people, so that's where Mark's numbers. You can see the 14% down to the 12% and things like that. So you all with me? You ready to pass immigration law? So what's the next problem? The next problem is we have all kinds of ineligible ways. And the law does all kinds of things like we don't want criminals, we don't want people with claiming U.S. citizenship when they're not citizens. And so if Tony was eligible, he'd have to go through a whole process for me to check out to make sure he doesn't have one of about 30 things that can knock him off. Right? And that's where that's where it's getting hard. Because Congress has decided we can keep ratcheting up, so that people can't get in the country. We have a thing called aggravated felony. Sounds terrible, doesn't it? Aggravated felons. And it should be. But Congress said, this is a good way to deport people. Call him an aggravated felon, and they'll have no remedies. Even though he's my brother, he can't get in. And so every year they add a few more things, where it used to be like thousands of dollars for theft. Now it's a $10,000 theft. So if I go for a joyride in my friend's Lexus, not good, not condoning it, but one, youthful indiscretion, you might have an aggravated felony. Right? You cheat on your income tax, you might have an aggravated felony. So Congress said, this is a great way to get rid of lawyers. Just move them up. And so every year they just keep adding the aggravated felonies. It sounds bad when it makes the Chicago Tribune or the Sun-Times, but you have to go behind and say, what really was the crime? Or did someone plead to something when they were 15? At the time, it wasn't an aggravated felony, and now it is. And when they come to immigrate, all of a sudden, they're out of luck. So the remedies are getting smaller and making it harder and harder. In fact, through this last year, we bring in 1 million, we deported over 1 million. And another 4 million left voluntarily because their lawyer said, you have no luck. You're out of luck. So basically, 1 million come in, 5 million leave, and then we saw from Mark's numbers the unauthorized population is going down too. So where was that problem? The press all talks about getting overwhelmed with immigrants. You tell me, I don't know. Now I want to do one really quick thing and then go into some projections or whatever. This is Lent, right? I'm talking to, I hope we're pluralistic. So I did a little thought experiment the other day. So this is my quiz for all of you to see if my teaching has helped anyway, all right? What would have happened to the gospel story if American immigration law was there when this story began? So let's do a few things. Oh, wrong way, sorry. Okay, Eve gets kicked out of the garden. This is from lectionary readings. So if you're following the lectionary, right? And she takes the apple and she's kicked out, right? Well, she can't get back in. The good thing about the Eve story is God's grace took care of her and Adam. But we start with a refugee and she's out already. And we're not going to let her back in, okay? All right, so what's next? Oh, Noah, all right? Go forth from the ark. Well, it's kind of funny. He lands on land. If you're a Haitian, you're not allowed in. This is true, right? If you're Cuban and you land, well, you're fleeing Castro, so maybe you'll get in, right? So this is American immigration law. So depending on what Noah's nationality was, he might have gotten in, but maybe not, all right? So I'm going to go pretty fast. Oh, then God tells Abram, go forth from your country and your kindred to the land that I show you. We talk about what a faithful statement that was, right? How beautiful he and Sarah went out, right? Well, there's a lot of roadblocks out there. Did he have proper papers? Where's he going to go? Who's going to? We have an international law. You always have a right to leave, but you don't have a right to enter. So if he kind of came to someplace, roadblocks, can't get in. Then Joseph's sold into slavery. We've got slavery. Well, we have a T visa. If you're trafficked, you might get a visa. But a lot of kids never have a lawyer that say, hey, did you know you just got arrested for slavery, being a slave? So he might not have even gotten to Egypt. Or was put in detention. But it gets even worse. His brothers had a famine, right? So they come to Egypt. They're public charges. That's one of the things. If you're poor, you're not allowed in. His brothers never would have got into Egypt. We'd never have the Joseph story. It's getting worse. Moses, he flees, right? Wait a minute. He murdered an Egyptian. He's an aggravated felon. Can't let him into promised land. No aggravated felons. We don't want you. There goes the exile. He never even gets back to Pharaoh. We don't get the plagues. Moses, you're not even a name. Mary and Joseph, they flee to Egypt, right? Well, I have an orange light here. I'm not sure what Egyptian immigration law is, so not sure you can get in. All right? But then they try to come back with this baby named Jesus. Did he have a birth certificate? Did he have any identity? Sorry. Who do you think you are? And then this is the fourth Sunday in Lent, so if you haven't read all your lectionary readings yet, at the Pool of Siloam, they're trying to figure out who this guy Jesus was. And this is John 9, 29 through 30. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we do not know where he comes from. Big no-no. Immigration law. If you don't have papers and know where you're from, we assume you're an immigrant and you're out of here. All right? So just think of that, folks. No gospel story. We've got nothing. So that's the not so good news. A couple of minutes here before I finish, and then I just want to say a couple things to the DREAM Act. Part of that was to dream. We have this law that says, under the 14th Amendment, that came out of the Civil War, came out of the Dred Scott, one of the worst decisions ever, that says if you're born in this country, you're not property, you're not Dred Scott, you're not a slave. If you're born in this country, you have the rights of a citizen. Right? And the Supreme Court in Plyler v. Doe 30 years ago said, children of undocumented have a right to public education. But that only goes up to high school. So we give them this remedy, we get them educated, we get valedictorians, we get all kinds of people, and they can't go to college. So we do the DREAM Act, we say, let those people get educated. They will be among our most productive citizens. 8, 9 years, it never passed. Always lost by 3 or 4 votes. Someone said it's like ice and fire. The people that don't like immigrants thought it was too generous. The people who liked immigrants said, well, if we just enact one part of thing to get these people in, we won't be able to do all the other things, so we're not going to vote for it. And so we didn't pass a DREAM Act. And again, we've educated these kids through high school, we've done all this work, and what happens? They're stuck. So the problem is now, the political climate, we're not going to get a DREAM Act. Right? Rebecca's asked me a few things. There's just not a lot of luck in Congress right now for getting anything positive, right? People think we're being overrun. I think Mark's numbers show we're not. Right? People think the law is generous. I hope my sense is, in some ways, 1 million people is generous. In other ways, we are extremely myopic in what we're doing. And so one of the things for hope in dreaming is perhaps we can do some things administratively through the executive office of the president. We may not be able to get through Congress, but there's a lot of discretionary things that perhaps we can encourage our administration to be a little more generous about immigration. So I encourage you to think about that. I can talk more about that in the questions and answers and that sort of thing, and the kinds of hopes. So thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. I do not have a PowerPoint. I don't teach anything related to immigration here, at least not yet. But what I have been asked to talk a little bit about is theological ethics and how it relates to immigration. I'm going to talk primarily about Catholic teaching on immigration and the work that the Catholic Church is involved in. But I've had the opportunity to speak on several occasions with a rabbi and a Muslim scholar. And I'm finishing up a book that Craig contributed to where we're looking at Islam, Judaism, socially engaged Buddhism, and Christianity. And basically, any religious teaching throughout the world is going to be in line with the rest of the teaching. Whenever I'm speaking on any panel with anyone from any religion, we all say the same thing. Now, part of what Craig talked about is why. If you look at particularly the Abrahamic faith traditions and the main figures in all of those traditions, the phenomenon of migration is central to most of the stories. So we have, Abraham and Sarah, Jacob, the book of Ruth, we have the Holy Family. So Christianity and Judaism in particular, but also Islam, will have a very strong teaching about the requirements of hospitality. Now, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam also are worldwide institutions or worldwide traditions that do not see themselves as limited to the nation-state system, which is another reason why they're all going to pretty much call for the same thing. So there are 4 main areas that I want to try to quickly cover. Immigration is so complex that it's really hard, as you can see, for everybody to just do 20 minutes because one thing Craig didn't mention is if you know anything about immigration law, our immigration law system is more complex than our tax code. And if you think about, the attorneys that you have to hire and pay just to deal with your tax situation, our immigration code is more complex. So a few things to highlight out of Catholic teaching that I think are particularly important. The first one is what I was alluding to as an international institution. One of the main teachings of the Catholic Church is that the human person precedes the state. So we have a nation-state system that we've set up to organize ourselves in the civil sphere and politically speaking. But the human person and the human community come first. We're prior to those constructions. So there's a belief that any discussion about a person is about whether or not that person is able to flourish in his or her own life. So the primary way of talking about a person is not whether or not they're documented or undocumented or what their status might be, employment authorized or not, but is that person able to flourish in a community that is able to also flourish in part because that person is a part of it. So this whole sense of the human person preceding the state is important for migration, but it's particularly important when we talk about people who are undocumented, because oftentimes their undocumented status is the primary way of categorizing them. So the church would counsel against that. The Catholic Church focuses on 5 main rights that they believe every person has. The first right is every person has the right to find opportunity in his or her homeland. If you look at research on why people leave their homeland, the vast majority of people move because they have to. They're not making a choice to move, they have to move. And the Catholic Church sees human dignity, which is one of its main teaching, that our dignity comes in part by the community that we're brought up in. Our language, our culture, our religion, the way in which we worship, all those are part of who we are. And that in order to flourish, in order to seek one's fulfillment, it's often primarily within one's own community. And if you're forced to move to another culture, another language, another socioeconomic system, another employment system, that generally speaking, for that particular migrant, your human dignity is often diminished, in large part because of the lack of hospitality that migrants receive by the receiving communities. So the first right is that people should have the opportunity to seek their own survival, their own basic needs, and ultimately their own flourishing within their own homeland. The second right is if you're not able to realize your own human flourishing within your homeland, you have a right to migrate in order to support yourself. And this relates to that whole concept of the human person preceding the state, that a person being allowed into another country should not be denied that entry solely because they may be considered a public charge, as Craig mentioned, or the very long list of reasons why people are denied entry to the U.S. So people have a right to migrate. The third right is that sovereign nations have the right to patrol their borders. Sovereign nations have the right to create a system by which people can enter. This is the one right, though, that has a but. The but is that you cannot keep people out if you're doing so in order to maintain a high standard of living. And this comes out of the church's teaching regarding stewardship. So all of the resources that we have, our financial resources, our material resources, our own gifts and talents that we can contribute to the community, we are to have a disposition of that of a caretaker. So possession, ownership, is really a problem in the Judeo-Christian tradition. We're to see ourselves as being a caretaker, and everything we have, we should understand as having some social destination. God has given us dominion over something that we are then the caretaker over for our community. So sovereign nations have the right to regulate their borders, but not to deny people entry in order to maintain a high standard of living, because that would go against the concept of stewardship. The fourth is that undocumented people should be treated humanely and with dignity. So the second right is that they can migrate. If they migrate, the focus is to be on their own dignity. And then last, people who are seeking asylum or refugee status are also to be treated with dignity. They are to be given refuge from that which they're fleeing. They are not to be detained, and they are to have their claim heard by a credible and competent authority, which is typically not the case in the United States and a lot of the practices that the Border Control has set up. With all of these rights, Pope John Paul II, after doing having a synod of all the bishops in the Americas, came up with 3 calls, particularly that the U.S. Catholic bishops and the Mexican bishops have asked to be focused on in terms of migration. And it's particularly appropriate for the Lenten time period. And those three are communion, conversion, and solidarity. So in terms of communion, if you're offering hospitality to someone, you have the opportunity to create a relationship with them. And when we talk about human dignity, I think in the United States context, it can be really difficult to get a sense of what human dignity really means, because we live in such an individualistic society that's focused so much on property rights, on negative rights, that I have the right to what's mine and you have no right to what's mine. Whereas in the Christian tradition, the teaching on human dignity comes out of our understanding of the human person being created in the image of God. And that God in whose image we're created is understood to be a Trinitarian God. Now, it's very difficult to say much about the Trinity. It's a mystery of the faith. But when people do articulate something about the Trinity and God, the focus is always on the relationality of the Trinity. That it's this relationship of love between the three entities. So in terms of our own human dignity, we're only human if we are persons in relationship. And that relationship is not to be understood as stopping at the border. So one's birthplace or one's immigration status is not to dictate that relationship. So in terms of communion, if you provide hospitality to people, you'll learn their story. You'll see their face. You'll see what they've gone through. And in the midst of this relationship, the receiver will have a conversion experience. So when we talk about immigration a lot in the U.S., it's this utilitarian calculus, right? What do we get out of immigrants? And if we get enough out of them, then it's okay for some of them to be here. Whereas in Catholic social teaching, there's this sense that we all grow through the suffering, oftentimes, of what the migrant is experiencing. So there's a call for us to have our hearts and minds converted as a result of this experience of offering hospitality to people. And hospitality is not meant to be this experience where you sort of give out of your excess and you don't then have a relationship. And oftentimes, Abraham and Sarah offering a generous feast to the three visitors representing the Lord is put out there as what hospitality really is in terms of the stranger. So communion, conversion, and then solidarity. The more you have a relationship with someone and understand their story, the more your mind and heart are converted, the more that you will then be committed to working for the change that will enable them and you to realize your human dignity in a more holistic way. So conversion, communion, and solidarity. Then the last piece, which doesn't get a lot of play, I think, in Catholic teaching, is that whenever we talk about rights, which we do quite a bit in the United States, the bishops always challenge us to think about what the corresponding duties are. For every right, there's always a corresponding duty. And oftentimes there are more than one corresponding duty. So for instance, if somebody has a right to find opportunity in their homeland, if we're looking at public policy discussions here in the United States, we have to look at what are the reasons for migration to the United States. I mean, yes, people migrate because we have labor markets here that are unfilled at the unskilled and the highly skilled levels. But we have a lot of foreign policy, economic policy, free trade agreements, subsidies to U.S. corporations that result in markets shifting such that lower income entrepreneurs in other countries end up having to move to the United States. So the question isn't how many people do we let in, but it's this complex web in the midst of globalization for what rights and duties are called for from us as people in a receiving country. What policies do we have to push for in addition to people being treated justly once they're here, people being able to adjust their status within a reasonable period of time and not waiting 19 years. So that's why immigration really is a very difficult topic to cover, because there are so many ways in which you can enter: family, employment-based, refugee, or asylee. And each of those categories, with regard to the globalized world that we're living in right now, has multifaceted situations that impact that. But generally speaking, here in the US, we create policies that we benefit from, primarily. But many of those policies that we benefit from end up resulting in push factors, which are then why people end up coming here. So the duties piece is not talked about very often, but the Catholic social teaching really does challenge people to say, anytime you want to talk about a right, think about what the duty is against you that needs to be satisfied in terms of that right. You may have a right, but you also have a duty. So I think that's sort of a general summary of Catholic social teaching, and I'll stop there and hand it over to Elena.
It is a privilege to be here, and what a great opportunity to talk to you. I just feel at home in this place. There is a spirit here. Thank you so much. I really feel very welcome. Thank you for the Siena Center and all the ones who organized this wonderful panel. I'm not that great with technology, so Mark has this powerful multimedia. I wish I could learn. I'm learning these little things, moving things. I have to ask one of my interns to teach me how to do that. So my power presentation is very steady, kind of just the traditional one. But I hope this will communicate our ministry with immigrants in the Archdiocese of Chicago. I want to give a very brief overview of the Archdiocese. The Archdiocese is formed for Cook County and Lake County, and it's the largest diocese in the state. We have 6 dioceses in this state. We have 6 million people in the Archdiocese of Chicago, and around 40% of them are Catholics. And if you ask me how many Catholics go to church, that's a different story. Very interesting. Only 25%, but 40% of people say they are Catholics. 41% of these total Catholics are Hispanics. 70% of Hispanics, of course, are Mexicans. And 8% of immigrants who are Catholics are Polish, and 6% are Asians. And we're using the number of, we're estimating that around 300,000 people are in Cook County and Lake County because it's the largest, it's the largest metropolitan area here. But we have 357 parishes in the Archdiocese, and 130 of them have Hispanic congregations. 50 of them have Polish congregations, and there is a presence of Filipinos, particularly in 70 parishes. They have a Simbang Gabi, is a Christmas tradition, and they have these large numbers of Filipinos during Christmas time. And we have those celebrations, 70 parishes. That's how we know the presence of Filipinos. Let me just give you some little numbers that I learned yesterday. I'm thinking, wow, I didn't know about this. But because of this, I learned. In 1992, we had 158 parishes with 158 masses. Okay, in 2009, it went to 267. Polish masses in 92, there were 38 masses. In 2009, we have 91 masses. Meanwhile, English masses in 92, we had 1,629, and in 2009, 1,308. So these numbers are shifting. It's very interesting. A lot of things. I'm very curious about that. These statistics I gave you are 2000s. They're still a little old, but fascinating, right? In terms of those changes, and you're gonna see. I visited all the parishes in the Archdiocese. At that time, it took me 6.5 years, and I went to all of them. We used to have 265. Now we have 357, so the numbers are decreasing. And also, I just started visiting since my office, since we started working in my office, I did my second round, so now I'm doing my second visits, and this time only to immigrant congregations. So this is what I found in my visits to parishes. For example, we have one parish, St. Francis of Assisi. I was visiting the pastor, and he said, "Hey, Elena, I'm so busy. Father, what's going on? I've been baptizing and baptized. How do you know those names? 2,800. I can't believe, Father." I said, "Yes, we've been really baptizing." And I was thinking, did he tell me 1,800 or 2,800? I called up the secretary last week and said, "Oh, Elena, we have baptisms 100 per week." And I said, "Okay, so those numbers are correct." But we have a lot of kids. And in Waukegan, when I visit the Waukegan, also 1,200 kids in religious ed. There's a lot of kids there. And St. Agnes in Little Village has 11 masses, so there's a lot of things going on there. And we have a lot of parties for quinceañera. These are the 15 years old, parties. And there's one parish that has 40 during the summertime. So there are a lot of things. In terms of the Polish community, I really love their commitment. We have 5,000 people walking for 32 miles. They go to Indiana. But in terms of Our Lady of Guadalupe, we have 50,000 people, much more than that. Somebody told me over that, but for me, that's the kind of close to the number that we have people coming to Our Lady of Guadalupe, the celebration they have in December 12th in Des Plaines. In terms of, there was something very significant in the Catholic Church, and Liz mentioned very briefly. The U.S. Catholic Conference of Bishops, which is the highest body of the Catholic Church, launched a campaign in 2005. And this campaign was very significant, for me, very prophetic. And thank God we have this campaign. And the goals of these campaigns is to educate Catholics on the benefits of immigration and immigrants, and to advocate for immigration reform. The third goal it was conditional. If the law passes, to help them. But well, fortunately or unfortunately, I am from Peru, and if there is a campaign, you work for the campaign until the goals are achieved. That is how I learned. That's how we do. And in this case, the bishops launched this campaign, and in Chicago, we are very committed, since 2005, committed to work until the immigration law is passed. So we've been working a lot. If I tell you, I don't want to spend time on that, but if you have any questions, just let me know. A lot of things, just from collecting 200,000 postcards during 2005 and 2006, mobilizing over 400 speakers in 185 parishes, and now we have a network that we're going to talk a little bit more later. But what happened in 2007? In 2007, the law did not pass. And to me, this is a perfect season to think and to talk about. To me, the undocumented community is walking the way of the cross. They were exposed to a nation who watched them naked, yes, naked, in 2005 and 2006. They came from underground to show their faces, because there was hope. There was hope for change. There was hope for immigration reform. And they came out. And you saw them during the marches, and some of you participated. They were exposed. They were mocked by legislators who initially supported immigration reform, and they retracted for fear of losing votes. And all the promises that we heard in all the administrations, from President Bush, President Obama, they were mocked. They were spitted by the verbal abuse and violence rhetoric. They are spitted right now. And they are rejected by towns and municipalities who are increasing anti-immigrant legislations. So we saw in these last several years an increase of enforcement and deportation. In 2000, there were 200,000 deportations in a year. In 2010, it went to 400,000 people who were deported. There is an increase in anti-immigrant legislations. 46 states, they passed 346 anti-immigrant laws. And between 2000 and 2009, 107 cities, towns, municipalities are passing anti-immigration laws. The increase of hate groups, the Southern Poverty Law just released a couple of weeks ago. There is an increase from, I think, from 250 or something like that 3 years ago now to 1,000 hate groups and a large, significant groups of these anti-immigrants. So immigrants are forced to live in the shadows. The fear that they feel, the fear at home, their fear in the workplace. Rates. I know that the rates of the ICE rates decrease, but I call these digital rates. These are the rates of the E-Verify, where they have to show the proper documentation. And there is a whole movement you probably heard about in Congress that to make mandatory to all companies to mandate the E-Verify. Can you believe if that will happen? What would happen with these people? So fear at home because of detention and deportation. So people are fear to go to work because of rates and the E-Verify. They are fear at home because of deportation. I was in Blue Island a couple of weeks ago, and one lady said, "Why don't we do," talking about our immigrant ministry, and she said, "Why don't we do a workshop here in the morning? I can bring 20 women." And I said, "What's going on here?" I thought she had little kids, and he said, "Well, I learned that mothers are choosing to stay at home in order to lower the risk of deportation." So a husband and wife, they're preferring to go. The husband goes to work, the wife stays at home with the little kids. Or some of them are older kids, but just to keep the family. And they are saying, we're walking to school now. We're working 12 blocks, or they are moving to areas that they can go. They can walk. They are not driving. So there's a lot of things happening in terms of that fear. So people are, as we heard before, financially. Immigrants were beaten at home. That's why they moved here. And they are beaten again here in this country with the weapons of anti-immigrant legislations, the weapons of anti-immigrant rhetoric, hate activities, and the weapons of enforcement. In the case of Mexico, as you probably heard, these people are trapped. Every Friday, I'm at the detention center for 4.5 years. And I just started a year ago because of our law that we're implementing. I'm there at 4:30 in the morning. And last Friday, as I always, these kids are so fearful to go. A lot of youth in the last several months. They're so fearful because as soon as they are in the border, all the people, the whole cartel, the violence, everything that's happening there, so their lives are at risk. And 34,000 people, that's the number of deaths. In between 2007 and 2010. So, what do we do as immigrants after the law didn't pass in 2007? Immigrants, whether documented or undocumented, we ask ourselves, what could we do now that we are living in uncertainty? Could we do something for ourselves? To assist ourselves, to do for ourselves? What is God telling us? All of us are pilgrims, not just immigrants. All people of faith are pilgrims. God is walking with us. How is our faith inviting us to be transformed and to transform society? That was the question. Then the immigrant-to-immigrant ministry, which in Spanish we call Pastoral Migratoria, was formed as a response to that question. It's a ministry that connects faith and lives as immigrants in this country, to read the realities of immigrants with the lenses of faith, engages in service and justice actions, responds the reality with service and justice actions, and we are formed as leaders for their parish communities. They are leaders, ministers, agentes de pastoral migratoria in their parish community. This is a ministry of empowerment. Empowerment that comes from our faith, and it is engaged in the realities of immigrants in this country. The immigrant-to-immigrant ministry has 4 components. One is reflection, which is very, very important. We read the scriptures in the context of the present reality and society. We see these stories that we just talked about, Craig and Liz. We see from the immigrant reality. I could not believe how they developed their Psalms of Immigrants. I invite you to go and visit our website. It's unbelievable. If you want to read really Psalms now, the pain and the hopes and how God is so present when women cannot go to work, the pain and all the things that are experienced, and God is vividly present with people. So that is one of the components of the immigrant to immigrant ministry. Reflection, the scriptural reflection, Catholic social teaching, prayer, and we have retreats. The second component is service. After a series of training, I'm going to talk a little bit about the training, but they might choose to do informational tables, have an informational table after masses in basic information for immigrants. They might choose to develop workshops on immigration, housing, education, domestic violence, all kinds of things. Or they can develop have a legal clinic. That's one of a huge need that they have. Health fairs, because people don't go to doctors, to dentists. So we can bring those resources into the parish community, or filling out income taxes, etc. And accompaniment is another thing too. Support families who are separated by detention and deportation. And I'll touch a little bit at the end. Justice, also continue working for immigration reform, as well for other related issues to the immigrant community, racial profiling, labor issues, etc. And in this process, leadership development is very, very important. We have a training, a 5 to 9 week training in clusters of parishes. We don't do training only in one parish. We recommend that the parishes work together. So they have like 5 or 6 or 7 parishes together, and the pastors are very involved. This is very, very important because they are the ones who have to assist us in the infrastructure of this ministry in the local parish. So we use a model of the training to trainers, and leadership development is very, very important. We work in collaboration with several organizations for each of the components. As you can see, we work very closely with the Council of Mexico. We've been working from 2000. We just started in 2009, and we have the priests and the deacons and the sisters. They help us in the theologians, the reflection. This is an area that is in development. The ones who are more developed is the information and resources somehow. But reflection is something that we just had great news of having a wonderful team of Claretians and several theologians who are helping us to develop a curriculum, an outstanding curriculum that is going to be helping in this ministry. We are in the process of creating infrastructure in the parish ministry. The cardinal, this is very symbolic. I learned a lot, but one of the things that the cardinal does, we wanted to make sure that this is a ministry within the local parish. So we created an infrastructure in the local parish. That it's not just a little program, an initiative that's going to be a 6-month. No, this is a ministry. So the cardinal agreed to sign a letter because all the gentes, the ministers of Pastoral Migratoria, they receive a Bible, and he signs, and he says, actually, blessings in your ministry to immigrant, your Pastoral Migratoria, immigrant to immigrant ministry. And the bishops are present in commissioning ceremonies, and we have around 400 leaders who were trained in these last 2 years in 55 Hispanic parishes and 5 Polish parishes. And as I said, we always work in clusters of parishes. I want to touch very briefly, just give me 2-3 minutes regarding deportations and accompaniment. There is an estimate of 12,000 people who are deported from Broadview. 35% are criminal deportations and 65%. And can you see the number? These numbers come from the Department of Homeland Security. In my personal experience, because I'm there every single Friday, my numbers are lower than this. My numbers are 20% criminal cases, 80% non-criminal cases. The stories after stories, for me, Fridays are Good Friday, the Stations of the Cross, are very difficult days for me. When families, husbands, wives particularly, little kids, and the families who are being separated for deportation is just unbelievable. And the cases after cases are, you name it, traffic violations, or any tiny little traffic violation now being deported. All these laws, 1996, that was the worst immigration law under Clinton. That law now, all the kinds of things, people who are being deported in 3 days. Wednesday was detained, and Friday it was, and there is this lady with 4 kids, and she's pregnant, and the 3 little kids. What do you do in 3 days? It's just, Sister Pat and Sister Joanne we are 2 sisters who really worked to pass this religious access legislation in 2008. They call it, they just say it's evil. That's the only way that we can explain these kind of things. And seeing people not as human people. These are numbers, quotas, files, and the way how they're being treated. Because people in detention centers are not just handcuffed. They are shackled, handcuffed, and chained. Isn't that one of these is not enough? Why do you have to do that? And they're being being deported in cages. The buses are cages. So when we go and we want to talk to them, we cannot, we have to use a tiny little hole and talk, and everything like in cages. It's unbelievable. So we've been every Tuesday today, there were 90 people in McHenry. And you have to remember, even families, even lawyers, people cannot talk to undocumented immigrants in detention center in McHenry and Broadview face-to-face. The best they can do through televideo or telephone. That was the only way. So through this religious access, this law that we passed in 2008, we have the privilege, the honor. Thank God that we passed this. So we go and visit. This morning there were 15 religious ministers who had face-to-face contact with 90 people this morning. So we have around 60 ministers who are doing this ministry. Core Watch is also, we are present in the federal building every day to represent families, because families, as you know, a lot of them are undocumented. They can't go to represent their families. They are afraid. Who is the representative? The church, people of faith, us. Jesus, the Christ, needs us to be with them. Fridays, as I said, we are from 4:30 in the morning to 6 in the morning. We have ministers who are inside Broadview who also pray for the people, listen to them just before being deported. My role is really give orientation to families, because it's so dark at 4 in the morning. People, they don't know where is for 2 years. The address number was not there, so people doesn't know where it is. It's so difficult. So just basic things like that. And one of the roles that I have is also to connect this ministry, these families who are being separated, with the immigrant-to-immigrant ministry in our parishes, in the accompaniment piece. That's what we do. So that's the ministry that has been developed. We just started our informational campaign in terms of deportation, just what to do, what not to do, really basically prevention for deportations, basic things. So we just had like 17,000 flyers that we sent to around 25 parishes in the last 3 weeks, and so that in order to create awareness, and also for them to work in collaboration with the Illinois Coalition of Immigrant Refugee Rights to have a hotline that helps people in this kind of crisis. This is my last slide. We have the privilege and the honor. I have the privilege and the honor to do my work with a lot of lay people. I see some of them here, which I'm very grateful. We have also the Priests for Justice for Immigrants, a network of 200 priests, and the latest issue are secure communities, because secure communities is a legislation that really is the result of this secure community is the deportations. So they are implementing this secure community, and the deportations are are double and tripling. So the Priests for Just for Immigrants are really working in that, what to do, especially they're working with the sheriffs. In the last 2 weeks, there were several meetings and see how we can at least prevent to have more problematic issues with immigrants. The Sisters and Brothers of Immigrants are a network of 57 religious orders. Their specialty is really pastoral care. And the latest project that they have is to create safe haven, is what we call the shelters. People were families, because we're noticing that people are coming from Indiana, Kentucky, different areas. They are coming to visit or to do something, but they don't know, there are no places to go. So we're creating this space of kind of shelter, a 1 day, 24-hour, 48-hour, and also people who some of them they are released from some of them are released from the detention center. They don't know what to go, especially in the case of detentions. Thank you very much. I'll be happy to respond to your questions. Thank you.
Thank all of our panelists for a very rich evening. Normally when we come to presentations, we have the privilege of hearing maybe one, possibly two speakers. And they have rich productions for us and always enlarge, stretch not only our knowledge bases, but our hearts and minds. To have 4 in one evening, this is a rich banquet, and we can't thank you enough. We'd now like to actually open it up to the floor. Any of you who have questions, Jorge has a mic here that is live, and he'll be happy to come around to you and get your question. And this is all being taped, by the way. This will be made available on the Center for Global Peace. Yeah, here we go with the first question.
Buenas noches. Good evening. My name is Deacon Guadalupe Villarreal from Stanislaus Parish in Bloomingdale. And during this conference, I heard solidarity. Well, I want you to know, Chicago, that DuPage County, we're working hard on what you are working as well. Thank you very much.
Craig, I know the Immigration Act has been amended many times, but what is the date of the basic statute that, how old is the immigration law that we're now following, do you know?
65, maybe 54 earlier. Actually, you want to go back. The 20s started it in many ways, as we started adding a number of the exclusion grounds and removal grounds. We got some legislation in the early 50s. The Civil Rights Movement in 65 really gave the current parameters in a lot of ways. We added the Refugee Act of 1980, so that made the refugee provisions there. And as Elena said, 86, we got the Immigration Reform and Control Act. People might have heard of amnesty, so that was a major part. But the 90s were really critically bad. 96, as she mentioned, just a lot of negative things. And then 2000, 9/11 certainly hurt, and the numbers of detentions, the seeing the stranger as the enemy. So those are the main.
It's an old statute that really needs to be looked at, it seems to me.
Yes, and we have to come to. One hopes that the beauty of this nation of immigrants, that we realize how strong we've been because of the contributions, instead of forgetting the dream and locking people out.
You know, Reverend Greg, that in 1920, 75% of the immigrants in the United States were Catholic. Now, in the second decade of this year, 2010, 2011, the percentage is over 90% of the Catholics in the United States are immigrants. Just some facts.
Before we get too comfortable, I often show my students a cartoon from Harper's Weekly in the 1880s, and it shows a number of children playing on the sandy beaches of Coney Island, New York, which should bring nice thoughts of joy and summer fun.
and there's these alligators swimming across with their jaws wide open, ready to devour them. And when you look closely, it's Bishop's mitres. And it was the nativists saying those Catholics are going to come and make us a poorer, worse country. And so it's just a good reminder.
I had a question. There's so much hatred and meanness and anger in our country right now that seems so unfounded by the statistics that you show. I wondered if you could talk as to why you think that is. What do you think is the source of that meanness in our country right now?
Let me put some public opinion numbers on this, so that we've been asking, for example, the following question: are immigrants in the United States today a burden or are they a benefit to the country? And what we found that maybe back in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, majority of Americans said that they were a benefit. Today, Americans are somewhat split on this, and the numbers have really been coming down in terms of the benefit side. One interesting thing, however, is that young people, those under the age of 30, are the ones who are most likely to say that immigrants are a benefit and not a burden to the country. And so we see in youth generally a much different attitude about immigrants than among those, say, who are 65 and older. Another thing that we have done at the Pew Research Center, just asking Americans generally, is we've asked them whether or not they support Arizona's new law, Arizona's SB 1070. There's majority support for Arizona's 1070 in the country. But then we ask Americans, do you support a path to citizenship? There's also majority support for a path to citizenship. And in fact, a lot of Americans say, I support a path to citizenship, about a third of them do. And they also support Arizona's law. So I think that Americans are somewhat conflicted over what policies we should pursue on immigration. But generally speaking, young people are among those who are most open to more immigration, or more open to immigrants generally.
Part of some research I did as well found that if you look at the highest profile anti-immigrant groups in the United States, they've been founded or funded by one person. His name is John Tanton from Michigan. But he's created companies and subsidiaries where it's really hard to figure out where he's at. But there is not necessarily the groundswell of support a lot of times for a lot of the anti-immigrant rhetoric, but they do have a lot of very dedicated people who spend a lot of time on elaborate websites, and they're able to get the word out very well. They're also very well politically connected. Something that I've at least heard about the Arizona law is that it did not come about as a groundswell of anti-immigrant sentiment in Arizona, but it was actually the corrections industry found that this would be a boon to their industry if they were able to criminalize undocumented status. And so they worked with people in Washington to craft the legislation. Then you have groups like the Federation for American Immigration Reform who then go in and find groups that will support this, and then that's how the law was passed. So, but most people aren't going to know that. They're just going to think, well, people in Arizona are fed up. But from having worked in an immigration law firm for several years, I mean, it's so complicated and people just don't know. You know, the number of people who will say, well, why don't they just get in line? You know, just come legally and you can come. Well, they don't understand that there is no way to come legally. And if you do try to come legally, as Craig mentioned, there are so many bars to actually entering, or the amount of time that would pass are so long. So I think it's such a complex issue with so much ignorance, and then a few people who are really able to stir up a lot of the negativity.
Thank you. I thank you for your presentation tonight, too. It's been enlightening and empowering in many ways. And it seems like in this political climate we have right now that the idea that there's going to be comprehensive immigration reform, that ship has sailed. And I was just wondering if you might be able to comment or talk a little bit about some of the other legislation that's out there, aside from the DREAM Act, about the ag jobs bill that would provide a path to citizenship for migrant agricultural workers.
My sense from talking to folks is a lot of the same problem is going to exist, however. There's a strategy discussion of whether if you do it piecemeal, you're going to lose the bigger picture. And so, like with the DREAM Act, it lost 2 or 3 senators who thought if I vote for this, even though I support the DREAM Act, it's going to hurt a bigger comprehensive immigration reform. That's why I was suggesting that legislation right now, almost all the current talk in Washington is detention and punishment and deportation that make it difficult for to even think of being here, increase enforcement. So there has been talk of work for ag amp jobs, but I'm not sure there's any, I'm not aware of anything really active right now. That's, the climate's not there. That's why I suggested people are, they don't want to give up, and they're looking for coalitions on these kinds of issues, but hope that there might be regulatory things that the administration can do, the Department of Justice, Department of Homeland Security, that they can find people. And again, I think as Mark's numbers showed, enforcement has gone up under the Obama administration, so even that has some problems to it.
If I may, oh, go ahead.
Just Greg, could you talk about? I know, in terms of comprehensive immigration reform, but it's to stop deportations, until immigration reform is we started the process. Obama, the president, has the authority to have an executive order. Could you talk a little bit more about that? Because we've been talking a lot in terms of if there's any advocacy, that would be one of the things to do.
Mm-hmm. We have 3 branches of government. Certainly the executive is charged with implementing the immigration laws. President Obama's staff are the ones that are making the arrests and the ones that are trying the cases, and there are some elements of the law that permit prosecutorial discretion, and there could be a suggestion that the Attorney General instruct the attorneys that are leading the court cases for deportation to show more discretion. That's actually an interesting element that we all can think about as citizens, that we're a nation of laws. And it seems to me that immigration law, although no law is perfect, is a prime candidate of how broken a law is. And so we as people of the body politic should be thinking, if you're going to have an immigration law, at least make it fair and maybe stay deportations until we make it fair. Stay and offer. So that's one of the areas of how do you make it just even more work like the rule of law, and perhaps even give our prosecutors more discretion. As an attorney, when I went into a case in corporate setting or other areas, there was always settlement discussions, there was mediation, there was all kinds of things that we maybe save the client some money and come out with a solution. There's very little area right now for any kind of mediation. As Elena was saying, it used to be you have a family, 3 children, they're going to be left here. Maybe there are some discretionary areas of, say, why is it's almost like capital punishment, right? The only remedy is deportation. Well, maybe we should have a little bit of a fine, or maybe community service. There should be so many other ways that we could think about discretion and to work this out. But again, you have the forces like Liz was talking about that want to make money off detention. Private detention is a growth industry in this country, and it started in the immigration area.
If I may interrupt for just a moment, I know that we had talked a little bit earlier, Mark, before the session began, and we talked about the issue with the congressional representation that the Pew Center had been involved with, and that along with the population question. So if you could just comment on that, please.
As many of you are likely aware, in the last couple of weeks, in Capitol Hill, there's been a lot of hearings regarding immigration and immigration policy, immigration enforcement, and a lot of it has been put together by Republicans on Capitol Hill. In this last week, a colleague of mine from the Pew Hispanic Center, Rakesh Kochar, he had written a report in the fall about employment, and I told you a little bit about what's happened with the employment story on immigrants versus the native-born. He was asked to come and testify. So he testified on Capitol Hill. No, nothing unusual. It was a standard testimony, but it was very interesting to see the reactions of both sides of the debate to Rakesh's, both his appearance, but also regarding the findings of his report. His report in the fall had found that immigrants were gaining jobs during the recession, but that the native-born were still losing jobs. However, his update to the report found that both groups now are seeing job growth in the recovery. So he presented some of those new findings on Capitol Hill. One of the other things that we have recently done at the Pew Hispanic Center is we published a report just today about population growth in the United States. And about half of the nation's growth during this last decade has come from Hispanics, largely from Hispanic immigrants. In a state like Illinois, probably would have had, probably could have lost one more congressional seat if it hadn't been for Hispanic population growth here in the state of Illinois. And for many other states like New Jersey, it's a very similar story. One other interesting thing about the census count, census counts generally in most states for Hispanics are coming in higher than the population estimates that the Census Bureau had published just a year ago for the Hispanic population. So it looks like the Census Bureau was actually predicting that there would be fewer Latinos in the United States than there actually are. Now, part of the reason for that is it's difficult to capture everything. Population estimates are based off of Census 2000 data and then changes that have happened since. So Census 2010 is very important for updating those population estimates. Nonetheless, a lot of that growth and a lot of those difficulties with coming up with estimates are actually because of growth in Hispanic immigrant populations. So in Alabama, the population count for Hispanics was actually higher by 15% than the population estimate had been just going in. For Illinois, it was about 1%. Big states like Illinois, things are pretty, you got pretty good estimates. But it's in states like Alabama and the Southeast, particularly where we saw the population counts for Hispanics much higher than the actual estimates, and that's largely due to immigration and immigrant population growth.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Xochitl Espinosa. I'm actually a proud Dominican alumni, and I now work for a pro-immigrant organization here in Chicago called the National Alliance of Latin American Caribbean Communities. And my question, we're really worried about the rhetoric that's going around against the Latino community, using the word illegal. And one of the things that, I have this question is actually for Ms. Collier. We're looking for to sort of we're fighting the dehumanization of immigrants as a whole. And one of the things that we realize is the media has a lot of impact, right? Like back, answering her question, like why is there so much meaning, why are these attacks on the Latino community? And one of the things that we realize is that the media it has been having a huge impact on what we think and the way we see people. And so we're looking for other outlets to fight against this, such as the social media and also religious institutions, because as she said, we have that sort of ethical and social responsibility to see people as human beings. So my question to Ms. Collier is what would you suggest? What kind of strategies or ideas for collaboration can we how can we engage the religious communities to help us humanize the immigrant community?
I would only have a few suggestions, and most of them are within sort of Catholic circles, but it's amazing how many grassroots organizations, particularly in the Chicago area, probably like the one that you work for, how many of them exist. And there is so much grassroots organizing, but it really is a matter of, like Elena was talking about, trying to gather 200,000 postcards. I was at a meeting with Elena a week or two ago, and we were talking about Senator Kirk. And I was frustrated with some of the feedback I had gotten from people who work for him that didn't make any sense based on what my question was. And I think somebody from his office told somebody at this meeting that, he's not going to work for anything on behalf of more comprehensive immigration reform, because when he goes to town hall meetings and when he hears back from people, he doesn't hear from people who are concerned about the dehumanization of immigrants. So a lot of it is trying to find a voice. And so if the people that he's hearing from are people who come from an anti-immigrant bent, then he's not going to have any reason to budge from his practice of not being willing to even see anybody who's working on behalf of immigrants. So part of it is, I mean, if you look at Network, which is a Catholic organization run by religious women, Justice for Immigrant website, is it ICIRR? RIP? I probably get 4 emails a day saying, go on this blog and answer this. Email your senator with this letter. I mean, so I think it really is, I mean, in terms of our political sphere, it really is about getting numbers of people. Some of it also is outcry when you hear things that happen. I don't know if this was the same congressional testimony as your colleague, but I got an email, I think it was in the last week, that at either that hearing or another hearing, FAIR, the Federation for American Immigration Reform, and Mark Krikorian were the 2 people giving testimony. Well, why would you invite them to congressional testimony? Like, you know what they're going to say, right? I mean, they say the same thing. They're part of this John Tanton group of researchers who cite one economist at Harvard to support almost all of their positions on employment and everything else. So I really think grassroots organizing is what we're going to have to do. And I mean, social media is such a boon, I think, to grassroots organizers because you can cross-pollinate a lot.
I think we also have to challenge language. Mark mentioned secure communities, or one of was here about this new, or Elena, that where Congress is calling, well, what is a secure community? That getting the police to fingerprint people and deport them, getting local police. Well, in some ways, I'm less secure when I know that the undocumented are afraid to go to the police. The mayor of Kankakee tells a wonderful story that he was tracking crime rates in Kankakee. And he realized that what was happening was the undocumented couldn't get bank accounts, and so they were keeping their cash in their mattresses. And so everybody knew that was a nice place to go rob money, and they wouldn't go to the police after they got robbed. So how secure was that? So he went to the Hispanic community in Kankakee. Wonderful story. They now have a sister relationship with a town in Mexico. He's been to Mexico. The folks are involved in the park district. They worked out matriculars to get bank accounts. It became a secure community when they took him out of the underground and said, you're part of this community. And he's been a great voice in speaking about that. But we let Congress label things about we're afraid of them and we need to do this extra enforcement with secure communities when it shows it just does the opposite. So we have to call that for what it is and object to that.
Before I move forward, actually, I'm going to pose a question to Mark Lopez. Sticking with objectivity, from an economical standpoint, what are the industries, really, the industries that are the base of the American economy that are really kind of sustained by the Hispanic Latino community? Are there numbers that say that we really are the base of the economic sustainability? Are there real numbers that exist that show that we are part of it, or is it all just myth? And if they are, let me know which industries are the industries that are the best, that are most.
Very, very good question. Yes, we have done some work on this. We have looked at the industries that Latinos are working in, also the industries that the unauthorized are working in. And a couple of things. When we talk about unauthorized immigrants, they're more likely to be in the labor force. They're more likely to actually be working than general Americans are. Another thing about the unauthorized, when we talk about the unauthorized labor force, it is concentrated in construction, it's concentrated in farming, it's concentrated in manufacturing. That's where we see the most. And also, food service and hospitality. When we talk about Latinos more generally, we see a very similar pattern. Latinos are more likely than the general American public to be in the fields of construction, in manufacturing, in transportation, than you see it for all Americans. One other thing I'd add, however, when we talk about educational attainment among Latinos, we also see that educational attainment among Hispanic adults is lower than it is for the general U.S. population. Now, that's partly because many folks as immigrants haven't come here necessarily to get more education. They've come here for other purposes, necessarily to work. But even so, even among those who are native-born, you see lower rates of educational attainment and a lower expectation among those young people that they actually want to get a college degree. We can send you specific data. If you want to send me an email, I can send you a link to reports where. Yes. Yeah. 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 In the construction industry, you'll see that about 25% are of Hispanic origin. That's higher than the share of the U.S. population that's Hispanic at about 16. When we talk about the state of Nevada, you'll notice that about 10% of Nevada's workforce are unauthorized immigrants, and that's highest of any state in the country. So those are the types of facts that I can certainly direct you to in reports that we've published over the years. It's hard to remember all of them, but there's quite a few.
We have space for one more question this evening.
Reverend Craig, I have a question for you. I do a lot of families at my parish, and they're starting to come forth now with their immigration issues. And I'm afraid to recommend them to an attorney because I do not know if this guy is for real or not. I'm afraid they may be swindled. What do you suggest? There are no testimonials that can help me. What do you suggest I do?
The Illinois Coalition for Immigrant Refugee Rights, on their webpage, has a list of all the not-for-profit agencies that have lawyers and accredited reps throughout the Cook County, and I think DuPage County as well. In immigration law, the government does allow certain non-lawyers to be what's called an accredited rep that can do legal work under the supervision of attorney. Those agencies, some of them have attorneys and others don't. So that's one place you can go to. You can also call those people if they're overworked, and they often have referral lists of attorneys they work with that are reputable. Many of them, not all, but are either community-based or religious-based. So they have their reputations to work for, and they often work with groups of pro bono attorneys, even each of those. So if it's it's a www.ICIRR, Illinois Coalition. Anyway, if you just Google Illinois Coalition for Immigrant Refugee Rights and look there for services. Joan, you had a question too.
I was just going to say, please.
I had a question for Mr. Lopez about dropout rates among Hispanics, especially male Hispanics. It was one of the highest. Is that still true?
That is still true. And so the question was, is it still true that dropout rates among male Hispanics are among the highest? Yes, it is. When we talk about young Latinos ages 16 to 24, what percent don't have a high school diploma? About 17%. I know that sounds a little low, but you probably have heard, but when we take into account all adults, you notice that the share without a high school diploma can approach 40% or so. But just among those 16 to 24, the youngest people, it's about 17%. But that's more than twice the next closest group, which is African Americans, which is more like 8-9%. So when you talk about dropout rates or the share of Latinos who don't have a high school diploma, it's much higher. But I want to add something here because I think that it's important to not only look at that particular number, but look at what the promise is among young Latinos. When you ask Hispanic adults, is a college education important for success in life? Hispanic adults are more likely to say yes, 88% say so, compared to the general population at 74%. Education is valued. You saw it on my slide, education is the number one issue. When you ask young Latinos, do you plan to go to college? You'll notice that they're less likely to say, yeah, they plan to get a bachelor's degree than whites, but the native-born, no. They're actually just as likely as whites to say that they want to get a college degree. When we ask young Latinos, though, however, why aren't you currently in school? Why aren't you pursuing your degree? The number one reason they give to us is they need to support family. That's the number one reason. So I think there's a view that education is important. College is important. There's a view, in fact, when you ask young Latinos, what did your parents say you should do after high school? The number one thing they said, and 90% of them, go to college. So there's a sense that college is important, but there's something getting in the way. Either their expectations aren't quite as high, or they have challenges that they have to address first. And they maybe have to help a sick parent. It may be I have to help with the family bills. It may be I have a young family myself. So in taking a look at it in total, I think there's a lot of promise for educational achievement among young Latinos. I think that figuring out what some of those challenges are, that's a tougher question.
Could I get one final in here?
Please, go ahead.
Elena, in your work with the whole Archdiocese and visiting all the parishes, I'm wondering, in terms of reception you receive, success in your work, with the parishes who have a significant immigrant Latino population versus those that don't. Could you comment on that disparity, if there is one, and what's that like, what obstacles you have encountered, and resistance that you felt?
To
To me, the main issue is conversion. And Liz was talking about what John Paul II talked about, our call for conversion, call for solidarity, for communion. We're very pleased, we're very blessed to be able to work, and this is a long-term, I think since 2005 we've been working a lot with parishes. Just to make the story short, and also just, I know because of the time, after 5 years, 2005 to 6 years, right? I even lost count. But I was so pleased to hear, for example, Holy Name Cathedral, All St. Pat's, St. Clement's, these are big parishes. They requested to do panels on immigration, and our panel are very similar. We have Catholic social teaching, immigration lawyer, economy, and pastoral care. And that panel, that setting format has been very successful. So I'm very pleased after 6 years, now the non-immigrant parishes are requesting more education opportunities, and we're very pleased to see. But it took a long time, and there is a lot of, I would say, maybe 30 or 40% of parishes, non-immigrant parishes, are very supportive to the work. And we have anti-immigrant Catholics who, what a contradiction of terms, but we've been learning how to respond more from the evangelization perspective, and the bishops and the cardinal have been very supportive in this process.
We'd like to thank you for your pertinent questions and also for your rapt attention this evening as participants. We couldn't have done this without you, and we do thank each one of you for coming tonight. We hope then that you'll also take with you some thoughts about what you can do to actually raise awareness and bring forth this issue as a social justice issue. I think that we all have been inspired tonight by our panel. Please rise and join me in thanking them.